Is liberty dying where you live? Escape to Keene at freekeene.com.
So now that Mr. Cantwell has taken the stage, let me introduce what is being called the Peace Roundtable. Although the table is not round, just pretend. This was an event put together by Mr. Ian Freeman, and I don't remember the description in the brochure that he put together, but there are two people who are on this panel who highly advocate peaceful means to bringing about an end to the state. And then there is Chris Cantwell, who has made it known that he believes that the state will not end peacefully. And hopefully some sort of agreement can be reached through this panel. On the far, my right, your left is Mr. Ian Freeman. In the middle is Mr. Chris Cantwell. And all the way down at the end is Derrick J Freeman. I guess if you guys want to introduce yourselves and then jump right into the panel.
Okay, I'll start, and I'd like to maybe have Derrick answer this question. And this isn't there's no presenter here, so we're just all talking, throw questions out. The audience microphone is here as well. I'm not going to open it up at any time. It's always open, so if you want to add something in, you want to ask a question. I guess I'll talk a little bit about my story. And my path to peace. I'm originally from Sarasota, Florida, and I came across the Liberty Movement thanks to smoking marijuana when I was 16 years old. I realized at that time that I'd been lied to by the people calling themselves the state, and I wondered how many more lies I'd been told. Turns out quite a few. So I came across the Liberty Movement through the Libertarian Party, the Harry Brown campaign back in the year 2000. I got active and got out there and started talking to people. And, once you start getting into this movement, you start tuning into the news more, and you hear about all the horrible things the police, for instance, might be doing to innocent, peaceful people who've never hurt anybody else. And that's a really frustrating thing to see. I mean, it's an angering thing. I mean, peaceful people shouldn't get hurt like that, but they do. And when those things happen and they start to pile up on you and you feel alone, wherever it is that you might happen to be, because nobody else is talking about liberty. Nobody else seems to understand the ideas. I don't know if any of you share this experience, but I know it's fairly common, and that's the reason why a lot of us have moved here. But it starts to pile up, and it starts to get pretty heavy, and you start to think, well, humans, of course, are built to survive, right? We want to fight or flight. So a lot of liberty people, given the buildup of arms among the police, I think a lot of their choices are I'm going to fight. I'm going to build up my arms. I'm going to get some body armor. I've got some of that stuff. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to take as many of them out as I possibly can when I go down. When they finally come for me. That was my mindset. That was before I moved here to New Hampshire when everything changed. And I don't know where it would have gone for me had I stayed in Florida, because I see stories of people like Schaefer Cox, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Schaefer Cox's story, but he's this relatively young guy in Alaska, and I think he shares a lot of the ideas that we have. I don't know him personally, but I followed some of his story. I think he shares a lot of those ideas, but he got kind of down this path of being in a militia. And there's nothing wrong with being in a militia, by all means. If you want to go out in the woods and shoot guns with your friends, that's cool. I've done that. If you want to make, militaristic kind of rankings and things like that, whatever floats your boat. But I think there's a danger to being around people who are of that mindset, because you encourage each other. The people you associate with will bring you up or bring you down. And in this case, he was around people who were talking about violence and as a solution. Of course, turns out one of them was a federal agent, and that is how things tend to go. They were recording a lot of these conversations, and eventually they allegedly recorded, and I haven't heard it for myself, but according to the affidavits, they had a conversation of him talking with his cohorts about killing a federal judge. And the idea was that it would be in retaliation for something that the state agents would have done, kidnapping one of their friends or something like that. And so they got this guy on audio, plotting to kill federal agents and state troopers and things like that. And needless to say, it didn't go well for him. He didn't actually kill anybody. He was just talking about it. And now he's in prison for, I don't know what the sentence is, but it's pretty ridiculous. So I feel like, when I see a story like that, I think, that could have been me. And I mean, I may end up in a prison cell anyway, just because I love liberty and I'm willing to stand up for myself and stand up for my rights. But I'm glad that won't be me, because I'm not plotting to kill anybody. I don't want to kill anybody. I think that killing these folks is really the wrong way to go about achieving liberty in our lifetime. And I think that's one of the cruxes of the issue. And so it's people like Russell Canning and Lauren Canario who showed me that you can be calm and that you can be even happy and jovial in the face of being arrested by the agents of the state, that really helped push me along the road to peace, where I really saw the value in that and saw over time the value of how that particular approach to things can help bring the people who believe in the state on our side, if we're loving towards them and caring and compassionate, even when they're not doing those things, even when they're being awful, to still show them love, I think is the answer and the solution. Can we go to Derrick? Do you want to tell your story, your path to peace, and then we'll let Chris just go on whatever he wants to say.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like that. So when I was going to school in Boston, Obama got elected, and I was really excited that he was going to end the wars and close Guantanamo Bay. And I'm serious, those were the things that I really rallied behind, and I wasn't the only one. And then I felt like the only one when I was disappointed when I kept following his track record, and no one else was. And I was like, well, aren't you guys upset that he lied and broke his promises? And no, they weren't. So I started realizing that a lot of people are just the victims of propaganda, and that we don't know much more as humans than monkey see, monkey do. And so I wanted to really break that cycle in any way that I could and analyze it. And then when I discovered Free Keene through YouTube and seeing people civilly disobeying in ways that had inspired me in the past through like Gandhi films and Martin Luther King, and I was like, this is happening right now? They did this last year or this year? That's amazing. I wanted to be a part of it. And seeing people who were hugging police, that was totally new to me, and it showed like a new way of thinking, a new approach, that it's not just the method of voting or guns. There's you can use your imagination, and there are endless possibilities if you get creative to achieve peace. And so I want to break that cycle by what I do is producing counter-propaganda, propaganda for peace. Because there's plenty of propaganda for war, and I think we need an alternative. Monkey see, monkey do. Give people an alternative, and hopefully they'll enjoy the peaceful way.
Hello, everybody. So, I used to think Sean Hannity was a wonderful man, and then I got arrested for DWI in 2009. I was 1 point over the legal limit. I was charged with a felony. I was threatened with 4.5 years in a state prison, and I said, something's wrong here, and I started studying for my defense, and I was studying the Constitution of the United States, and I found a 7-hour-long class by Michael Badnarik called Introduction to the Constitution. And during the course of that video, I started to realize, like, hey, this Constitution that he's talking about doesn't seem to resemble this government that Fox News is cheering on at all, and I became rather concerned. And if any of you have seen the video, sort of the conclusion that Michael Badnarik draws is, do you have a right to violently overthrow your government? He says, well, actually, you have a duty to. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. It makes perfect sense. And in the course of that video, halfway through, I'm radicalized. I'm a new person. I don't know the guy who I was the day before. And as time goes on, I'm reading different things, and I'm arguing with anarchists, I find, and I'm trying to restore the republic, and I'm losing the argument when I'm talking to the anarchists, and I'm saying, well, I've got to go back and study better, and I've got to make my argument better, and at some point I realized that I was losing the argument because I was wrong, right? So I said, all right, well, this state thing is not such a great idea, and I saw the debate between Michael Badnarik and Stefan Molyneux is another great piece of media. If any of you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to. And basically, Michael's premise in the debate between him and Stefan Molyneux was that you need to have a government, and even if you don't need one, you're going to have one if people won't defend themselves. If people are not willing to use force, then the state is an inevitability whether you like it or not, because if people can be taxed, then they will be taxed. If men with guns come around to take your stuff, and you give it to them because there's a threat of violence on the table, then don't be surprised when you're losing your stuff. The only reason that a criminal has to not be a criminal in most cases is a threat of force, and that's why we know that in a place like New Hampshire where the citizens are armed, that there's really little crime. Whereas if you go to New York, where I'm from, the crime is through the roof because the criminals have a license to steal because the cops aren't everywhere. Well, it's getting that way in New York City now, but the citizens aren't armed, so the criminals have the guns and they can go rob whoever they want. Here, the people are armed, so, private sector crime is really low. And oddly enough, so is public sector crime in New Hampshire. People have guns, there's a lot less government. The government doesn't screw with you as much when you have guns, which is why we don't want the government to come and take our guns, right? Because we know if we get disarmed, then the government's just going to walk all over us. We've seen it happen how many times? At some point, we all know that a line gets crossed, and that line is a value judgment that each individual makes. People always ask me, well, when are we going to rise up? And I'm like, we're not going to do anything. You make a value judgment for yourself. I made the example on Free Talk Live talking to Mark Edge. I said, look, the stuff that I get in trouble with law enforcement for is generally, it's a speeding ticket. It's $150. Probably not worth me getting into a shootout over. But, if you decide to, drive across straight lines with a kilo of coke and a fully automatic rifle, you might want to use the fully automatic rifle if you get pulled over. Because let's face it, if you're facing that much time in prison, they're pretty much going to end your life. If I'm facing 10 years in prison, I'm going to hang up in my cell. I'm not going to live through that. So if a person's going to come over and subject me to that, that's my life on the line. If it's a week, if it's a month, even if it's like 5 years, there's some debate in my own mind, what should I do? If I'm facing 10, 20 years in prison, no, I'm sorry. You're not going to do that to me. You're not going to go home and fuck your wife while I rot in a jail cell. It's not going to happen. You're going to go home dead, and I'm going to get out of there if I can. You might have a different value judgment, but I think that people need to start sort of drawing those lines in their own heads, because gun control is going to get through the United States Congress at some point. And if you wait until you're disarmed, this conversation becomes a lot more complicated. People tell me, oh, well, we can't fight them. They've got nuclear weapons and da-da-da-da-da. You think it's difficult now? Wait until you're disarmed. And they're going to do it. And there's nothing that we're going to do to stop Congress from passing these laws. There's nothing that we're going to do to stop these guys from coming around and enforcing them. They're not going to do it because you ask them politely. There's no rational incentive for them. It's not in their rational self-interest to stop until there's a threat. If they can take without consequence, they will. And that's the basic premise that I'm here to argue from today.
So, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I took a lot of notes during that, and I want to start with the note that I took the last there. You're talking about your life, and how in the situation with the cocaine and the assault, or the machine gun, that you feel like rather than go to prison, you'd rather just go ahead and shoot it out with the cops. Is that pretty much a recap of what you said?
I also don't run around with large piles of cocaine and fully automatic weapons.
That's the key.
Yeah, if you're in that position, it probably makes a lot more sense to shoot it out with the cop than to go to prison.
It's not some random event that you're placing yourself into. You're not just popped onto the earth with random cocaine in a random truck. There are events leading up to that, decisions leading up to that.
Of course,
that
true.
You can avoid.
But I thought you were saying if it were you. Is that what you would do if that were you?
If I was in a position where
and someone who cares about liberty, because to me, if you care about freedom, there's a more, and obviously not everybody agrees on this, but if you care about freedom, there's a higher goal involved here, right? We know that by doing activism, we're putting our lives on the line. I mean, if somebody decides that Chris Cantwell is too dangerous of a guy, the ideas, then maybe they'll come up with concoct some reason to take you out, right? Maybe they're going to, take me out or take Derrick J. Peace News Now becomes too popular. Well, we can't let this peace message get out. We got to get rid of this guy, right? I mean, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories out there about people who've spoken out being taken out, and some people who've spoken out have definitely been, taken out for whatever reasons. So I guess what I'm saying is when you get into activism, there's a chance, the more visible that you are, the more effective you are, there's a chance somebody could do violence to you, whether it's the police or some sort of federal agency or just some crazy lunatic on the streets. There's a chance of that happening. And in a lot of cases, if they're going to do it, they're going to get the drop on you, and you probably won't have the chance to shoot back. So your life's on the line is the point I'm making. If you were really concerned about preserving your life for as long as possible, you would probably not speak out. You would probably try to keep your opinions to yourself, try to float through life, keep your head down. We're not doing that. So we're already putting our lives on the line. That's already done. So I guess what I'm saying is, when it comes down to giving your life, if you're going to give your life for the purposes of advancing human freedom, because that's the chance that we're taking, so it means you're willing to do that. If you're willing to give your life for the purpose of human freedom, for advancing that, then you have to ask yourself, in a situation like you described, or whatever the violent situation or the potential for violence might be, what do you want to happen after you're gone? Because the way you behave in that incident is the most important factor. So if you're shooting it out with the police, then of course there's the, he's a crazy loon. Look at this gun nut. We've got to have more police. We need to have more metal detectors, more rules. Get some Bearcats. Where are our Bearcats? We need more of those. So every time somebody does this go out blazing thing, which I used to fantasize about, it gets worse. Liberty doesn't advance. And so if you're going to go out and you find yourself in a situation where it's you versus the police, you're better off turning on a video camera and, in my opinion, taking your own life at that point, because then at least they won't be able to say that you shot at them, presuming there are witnesses. Otherwise, they'll make up whatever story they want to. But I think that if you're going to give your life, think real hard about what's going to happen as a result of the actions you take.
Well, I would encourage anybody who's thinking about doing anything that could put their life in danger to put a lot of thought into it. And by the way, I do a lot of infotainment, so the lines get blurry with me, and you should not take anything I say any more seriously than your logical process leads you to, okay? You take what I say into consideration, make your own conclusions. Don't do anything because I said it. But if we're talking about, it gets worse. Well, it gets worse anyway, right? Like the Keene got their Bearcat before I showed up in New Hampshire. There wasn't any violence to speak of. Keene got their Bearcat anyway. No violence to speak of in Concord. Concord's getting their Bearcat. And they create a war on terrorism, they label you a terrorist, and then they buy a 2-ton war machine and say that they're buying it to use it against you. That's happened all in the face of peaceful resistance. It gets worse anyway, and the question becomes, at what point is somebody going to force them to stop doing it?
It's a good question. You talked about lines being crossed earlier, and there are different lines that could be crossed, and I want to make it clear that I'm not the pacifist who would a stranger knocks on my door with a gun and just shoots me. I'm going to defend myself. That's not my style, but I do believe in peace, and for me that would mean not. And I don't want to go after people who aren't attacking me. And so when people talk about the lines have been crossed, I think they refer to the Nazis and the line that was crossed, that people didn't stand up and do anything physically. They didn't physically resist. But there are so many other options that don't include violence when your line has been crossed. Just because my final line is like I described at my door and someone's got a gun to my neck. I mean, that's a serious line where I will use violence. Anything other than that is just not acceptable. I feel like as long as words are an option, that's what I want to use, especially, like Ian said, how's it going to be looked at later? One thing that's important to me is getting all of this on video. We're so fortunate to be in the age of information where we can document what's happening, not only for future people to watch, but for live people to watch. And so the way that people are going to perceive the violence of the state is really important. So the more peaceful you are, the more violent they look, I think that's important to underline. You don't need to use force to combat them. Peace is way more powerful.
Totally agree with that. In fact, it touches on something I wanted to bring up, and I call it the false choice, and it's frequently presented by the advocates of using violence against the state. And the false choice is that you either do nothing or you go out guns a-blazing and you shoot some cops. And there's a whole middle ground of non-cooperation in there that nobody ever talks about. And I don't blame them. To them, it doesn't exist. To the average libertarian sitting in his basement on Facebook, non-cooperation doesn't exist for that person. For them, all they're doing is they're looking down that news feed and they're seeing, oh, cop shoots dogs, cop shoots, small child, suffocates babies, whatever the dirty cop of the day story is. And they think, of course, boy, I better make sure I got my body armor and my guns. They're going to come for me someday and I got to get ready because there's no chance to do anything. And they're right. Where they live, there's no chance to really do anything differently. If they non-cooperate, they're going to go to a jail cell. And they're going to get out, and then they're probably going to be more obedient at that point. So what's, of course, different is the Free State Project and bringing people here. And yeah, Chris is right. Things are getting worse, I think, generally all around the country. Even one could argue that here in New Hampshire, there's a certain average number of police officers per, 1,000 population or whatever. It's I think 1 out of 500. Like 1 officer to 500 people is kind of the average across the country. 10 years ago or 15 years ago in New Hampshire was below average, but over the last 10 years, that average number has gone up. So there's definitely more cops, and they're more outfitted with their toys and tanks and things like that than ever before. But it's important to keep things in perspective. This is a long game. You can't just show up, as the old school panel was saying earlier, you can't just show up in New Hampshire and expect to win sprint. I love that terminology, to win sprint to liberty. It just doesn't work that way. We're just barely getting this ball rolling. We've only got about 10% of the total membership of the Free State Project here. And I think that there's a lot of really powerful, non-cooperative, civilly disobedient activism that hasn't even been touched on yet. We've seen little examples of it being successful, like the 420 celebrations with 100 people completely defeating the Keene police in a very, very short period of time. So please, the false choice, let's just take that off the table for discussion. It doesn't apply in New Hampshire. It's very common among the violence advocates, but those people, they believe they have a false choice, or they believe in that false choice because for them, that's reality. They haven't experienced real activism. They haven't experienced activism with peaceful people, and they don't know what non-cooperation is about. They don't know how powerful peaceful non-cooperation is.
Well, I would agree that as you lay it out, that's a false choice, and I think that people, right after I got kicked out of the Free State Project, a lot of people asked me if what I disagreed with Lark and Rose on, and at the time I was like, I'm not sure that I do, and later on, here's the answer to the question. I don't believe that other activism is pointless, and I'm not a guy who hasn't experienced the other activism. I've traveled all up and down the Eastern Seaboard participating in various forms of civil disobedience. I moved here. I lived just outside of Keene. I've done quite a bit of activism over the last almost 5 years, and I think that it's important, and it is a false choice to say that, well, you either go out guns a-blazing or do nothing, because there is a whole lot of in between. That's a false choice. The other false choice is, well, do you want peace or do you want violence, right? Because that's kind of like what the peace at all costs advocates put it as, that, well, do you want peace or do you want violence? Because clearly peace is preferable to violence, and we all feel that way. I prefer peace to violence. Give me the option of peace, and I will accept it 10 out of 10 times. The problem is that peace is not on our list of options. I agree that violence does not bring peace, which is why the violence of the state is such a serious problem. I agree that peace is the way, which is why it's such a problem that men are blocking our path, because they interfere with our peace. We are not at peace when men take our property, when men chase us around with guns telling us what to do, when they rob us on the sides of the highway and kidnap our friends while they sit in their cages right now. There is no peace. There's not peace now. It feels peaceful because nobody's bothering us at the moment, but we're sitting in property that is taxed. Everybody who got a room in this hotel was taxed. Most of you who are earning a paycheck are taxed. It's not peace. You're not at peace. People are stealing from you and threatening you with violence. if peace was a choice, I would accept it. And to say that, your choice is peace or violence is yet another false choice. Can we get William ask a question?
I am curious to hear what William thinks.
First thing, I just want to object, Ian, to your language, not necessarily your point, your end point that you brought up earlier when you said if you're going to give your life in that situation. I don't think that's what anyone is doing. No one, unless they're choosing to be a martyr, which I don't think most of us are, you're not giving your life, they're taking your life. And,
no, you're right. You're right about that.
I don't think that's
But you're putting your life on the line.
Really what it sounded like and is what it sounds like is keep your head down and you won't get hurt. And if you do lift your head up and walk tall, then if violence happens to you, well, you were kind of asking for it. And that's how it came across.
I'm sorry if I said you were asking for it, but it's a reality, right? If you, the old saying is the nail that sticks up is the one that gets pounded down, right? I mean, you stand up. If you're the only one standing up, they're going to get you. But if you got 100 people in Central Square smoking pot, then there's nothing they can really do about that. So that's why I think numbers change the game entirely.
On a different subject, I know that the panel is destined to discuss violence or nonviolence in a philosophical or ethical or moral, whatever kind of framework. But in reality, the question of whether or not violence is an effective tool for change on a nation-state level has been answered, and it's answered via game theory. The answer is when someone commits violence against the state, what percentage of the people are heavily invested in the state and feel that when the state is attacked, they are being attacked? At that point, it's always going to be failure. Historically, and because it's tied to economic collapse and economic ruin, as they continue to run the country down economically, more and more people will feel they have nothing to lose. They will stop feeling that when the system is attacked, they are attacked. They will stop. That ratio is going to change. As more people have nothing left to lose, that crosses a threshold, and game theory-wise, that is when violence or revolution overthrow becomes successful, however you want to label success. I mean, regime change, more likely, that's not success.
Right, because we haven't eliminated
for.
Violence, right?
Absolutely.
The use of violence to overthrow a regime has not eliminated regimes.
Okay, so on that note, one of the all-time examples that people point to of nonviolence is MLK. And if you're going to say the regime change is not success, then I have to question. I mean, I understand why statists say he was successful. I mean, because, now people can vote who couldn't vote before, or they have these great government programs that make us all equal, which we know are complete failures. What I don't understand is why anyone who's an anarchist would point to what he did and say it was successful in any way whatsoever. We have rampant institutionalized racism, and we have more minorities physically locked in cages than ever before in history. The fact of the matter is that what he did was a complete failure.
Koster goes on stealing my lines now. Thank you.
Come on up here. I agree that the system was very happy to have Martin Luther King work for civil rights because that was the treadmill. I agree. I also think he was killed when he stopped looking for answers inside the system. So in some ways it feels ineffective because they kill people that are peaceful. When he was meeting with the president, they loved that stuff, right? They silenced him partly by saying, hey, come meet with me, because LBJ did that, and then we'll do some stuff for you. And so I agree with William on that one, that, a lot of stuff that people think was really effective. Wow, the right to vote? What does that mean? But I think that for some of us that have spent a lot of time studying him, I think as soon as he got past that and started moving to be an anarchist, they had to kill him. Just like I think they killed Malcolm X when he stopped being violent.
Yeah, Malcolm X, I read it.
Then they had to kill him.
I read a book about Malcolm X. It was written recently when I was in jail for civil disobedience here. It was written in 2011 by a college professor who had unearthed a lot of extra information that didn't exist or wasn't available back when one of the most popular bios of Malcolm X was written, I think in the 1970s. And it was just fascinating. I didn't know that much about Malcolm X and really got to learn a lot. And the end of his life was a huge, dramatic turnaround in his thinking, because he was this really militant, violence-advocating person. And he went on the Hajj to, if you're a member of the religion of Islam, you should go on a Hajj if you can to Mecca. And that's when he realized that, wow, there's people of all shapes, sizes, and colors that believe this, and I was really wrong about things. And he changed his viewpoint and left violence. And I don't know who made the decision to have him killed. It certainly looks like it might have been people within his former church, the Nation of Islam, but that's obviously up to speculation. But yeah, he definitely had to turn toward peace and away from the use of violence, and they took him out for that. I don't even know where the question was going at this point, but I appreciate the comments.
Well, one thing that stuck out about the comments to me were that you called MLK a massive failure, or maybe those weren't your exact words, but that's a perspective thing. Maybe the goals that you think he was trying to achieve, he didn't, and that may be true, but this...
The goals he was trying to achieve have been achieved?
I think that there's a side benefit to anything that you do. And if you do a funky dance and your goal was to hit a certain mark, maybe you didn't do that dance the way you wanted, but you inspired someone else to learn a new way to move.
Well, a lot of times, Keene activists are critiqued. Hey, you guys haven't changed anything in Keene. And, well, maybe that wasn't the intention. I think that we're talking about more of the means. I'm not looking at so much of the political realm of what Martin Luther King was attempting to accomplish there, but more of the means of how he attempted to get his message across. The idea of not being violent in what you do, but also peacefully refusing to obey.
Well, I'm glad that we brought up Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, because I think it was Malcolm X that actually got the concessions that Martin Luther King sought, because you had Malcolm X running around stirring up people who would riot, who would burn cities to the ground over the injustices that they had suffered, and you had basically Martin Luther King holding back these angry mobs. And the reason King got the concessions he did, in my opinion, is because he was the one preventing the violence from happening. They feared the violence. King was the guy who prevented it from happening, so they gave concessions to King and said, look at how well peace works out. Peace works because we give you what you asked for. Isn't that wonderful? Well, I think that if there wasn't the threat of violence backing up the peaceful resistance that King had advocated, I think he would have gotten very few concessions, because I think politicians were honestly scared that they'd be violently overthrown if they didn't give King something.
Me? My turn? To me, the issue really comes down to time and place, and it seems to me that, Ian, when you say that it's not here, it's not happening to us right now, I posted just this morning to Chris Cantwell's Facebook an instance where a man peacefully resisted and did not exit his own home, and they used a very Bearcat-looking vehicle to crash through his house and kill him. It is now. So there is such a part of me that I am so inspired by Russell and William and you guys. I'm so lucky to know you. I'm such a better person for knowing you. But there is such a part of me that sides with Chris as well, because I am not a person who is going to sit and be peacefully killed when they come to my house, or my house on a wrong warrant, get my street address wrong. We see that all the time, and they kill me. I can't say that I'm going to not peacefully resist.
But you're going to die anyway. I mean, if you resist, they're going to shoot you to death. So if your goal is to get out in one piece, or at least some semblance of a piece, then shooting at them is a guaranteed way to not achieve that goal.
I'm a rabid advocate for the right to self-defense, and so long as if the threat is against me, then absolutely I have the right
totally
to act.
justified. No. I've never said anybody doesn't have a right. That's the problem, I think, with this, is that, yes, it fits within the non-aggression principle. Yes, you're completely justified. Yes, you have a total right to defend your life because, it's your life, and how dare anybody try to take it from you.
So then
you have a total right to do it, but is it effective? No, not at all. In fact, it's, in my opinion, counterproductive to go down the road of violence because you can never reach peace through violence. And if what your goal is peace, then you should renounce violence. And I haven't quite done that yet totally. Like you were saying, Derrick J, if somebody shows up and is trying to kidnap my loved one at my house, then I feel like I'm going to probably do something in that case. Unless they're a cop, yeah, because of the way that there's a perception of legitimacy that these people have, and I, like it or not, they have it amongst what the average people think. And I'm also flirting with the idea of total pacifism as well, simply because I think that these people, as misled as they are and as wrong as they are, they're not that different from me, and I wouldn't want to. I believe that we're all part of this larger organism. I wouldn't want to kill my own brother or sister in that way.
I would if they were going to take my life.
Well, that's just it. I totally understand, and I wouldn't fault you for that. But if it's the police coming after you, then you're not going to help our movement. You're not going to help freedom.
Certainly
in the long
not.
Run. You're going to make it worse.
For the movement. That's right.
That's absolutely true.
Russell, I'm poisoning the well.
And I think cosmically that it's wrong as well.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things Nemi touched on in that question is what Chris said, and I wrote down these words: "We are not at peace." You gave an example of a bear cat running through a house and killing a man. I recognize that this stuff is happening in the world, but I'd like to put out the suggestion that peace is in your heart, and it's not out somewhere else. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said that peace can't be achieved through violence; it can only be achieved through understanding. And hopefully, you can find understanding in those who haven't seen peace in their lives and they use violence as their way. Hopefully, you can have peace in your heart, despite the violence that these people use. They don't know a better way.
Peace in your heart sounds really nice, and it's a wonderful thing to desire until they show up.
You can have it.
Until the violence comes to you. If you have peace in your heart and men come to put bullets through it, you have a rather serious problem.
What are you going to do? I mean, fire or accept that you're about to die and
I am not accepting that I'm about to die.
Put some love out into the world in your last moments.
I think that that's dangerous, and you guys have talked about paying the fine just encourages them. Well, if you just let them roll over you, that just encourages them too. And
I think it shocks them.
It's
not letting them roll over you.
What happened to Tank Man?
You are not responding in the way they want you to.
When they come with the tanks, they come through, and you can either do something to stop them, or they can roll over you.
Tank Man is still alive.
Okay, well, good, because that tank decided not to run him over. But a lot of other people have been run over by tanks. Tank Man is a meme for a reason. It's uncommon. Usually when the tanks come, they roll over the people that they are coming for. That's what tanks do. That's why they build them.
I think that peace is always a choice. It's a choice that you make in any moment, and the more you make it, the easier it becomes to stick with it. I agree. It's frustrating when there's aggression that happens. I remember earlier on in my road to peace, there was this situation where I had I think it was Kurt Hoffman actually, was attacked by one of the police officers in Keene District Court, and he was taken out of there on a stretcher. I went outside. I was recording video with my cell phone camera at the time of them taking him from the Keene City Hall into the waiting ambulance, and one of the EMTs got really angry at me. I forget what he said, but he basically walked up and snatched my phone right out of my hands. And I remember I felt pretty angry about what he had done to me there, and I yelled something, fuck you, or something, fucking asshole, or etc., something like that. And then I realized what I'd said and what I'd done, and I cooled down, and I wasn't angry after that point. Because if we find ourselves in those places, we can shift our perspective and choose a different feeling. We can choose to feel pity. If I think there's like this spectrum from anger to love, or from hate to love, and if you can move a little bit on that spectrum, move from hate to pity, like feeling sorry for this poor angry man who is just so frustrated with his job and whatever other pressures he has in his life that
probably knows very little peace in his life.
Right. That he's going to solve his problems by stealing that activist camera. That poor man. Just feel sorry for that person, and try to see yourself as you're not that different from him. Maybe under the similar circumstances, you would feel similarly. So to try to empathize with the people in these positions. They are human beings, and I think that's part of what I learned when I moved to Keene. Things became more real. It wasn't just news stories. It was interactions with human beings. These police officers who are doing the wrong thing day in and day out. They're arresting peaceful people, but every now and then they do the right thing, and they should be praised when they do the right thing. And when they do the wrong thing, they should be told that they're wrong. But ultimately, peace is a choice, and if we're choosing peace constantly and consistently and outwardly displaying that, we are going to infect people in a very positive manner. I've seen it happen. We've got Brian Tan coming here later today. He's a former Cheshire County Corrections officer. He's going to talk about his path and what happened with his road, why he was working in a jail, and why he's no longer working in a jail. And I know, Chris Cantwell, I've heard you advocate that, or suggest, maybe not advocate, but to suggest that people go into jails with guns a-blazing and, break down the walls and shoot the guards if they get in the way and things like that. And I love Brian Tan. I wouldn't have wanted him to get shot in some sort of a jailbreak like that. This is a long road, and using violence isn't going to get us down that road. In fact, it's going to set us back.
If I could just respond to that before the next question. Brian Tan is going to be a speaker today because he's uncommon. Because for all of the peaceful activism that goes on, for all of the propaganda we put out, it's very rare that any of these people stop doing what they do. They keep on doing it, regardless of how many people try to be nice to them. So the context in which I've talked about going into prisons guns a-blazing is, if I had force of arms to do it, I would free Bradley Manning. And I would kill anyone who got in my way if I could do it. I can't, so I don't. But if I had force of arms to do it, Bradley Manning would not be in prison. If I had force of arms to do it, Rich Paul would not be in prison. And it's very difficult to argue with that because there's physics involved that, yes, you can break down concrete and steel barriers, and you can kill people who are trying to hold your friends in cages if you have the force of arms to do it.
But why fantasize about that?
It's not a fantasy.
That is exactly what it is.
No, it's not, because it's happened before. I mean, it's like, it wouldn't be the first time there was a prison break in human history.
Did that stop people from being imprisoned?
It got the people out of the cages.
Until people don't appreciate what the police are doing, they will continue doing it. You're right, they do keep doing it, and that's because they get reinforcement from people in the community who believe that what they're doing is right. But as soon as that changes, as soon as they get enough social ostracism and pressure from people saying, hey, that's not okay, I don't appreciate you arresting those college students for drinking alcohol or whatever, they're going to start to change how they behave. Nick?
I just wanted to start by saying that I'm not a pacifist personally, but I'm also not an advocate of violence. But I was having a conversation with someone last night, and I was asking them why the symbol of the Free State Project is a porcupine, or why people wear "Don't Tread on Me" flags as a symbol of libertarian ideas if they are so staunchly against the use of violence. I think that's something...
They're not.
They're not. So anyway, you said that it was less effective for people to use violence, but like in terms of the greater goals of achieving liberty. But that's kind of strangely reminiscent of the military's perspective, that it's okay to sacrifice yourself if your team is going to survive, basically. I don't know. I feel like there's a really strong moral inconsistency there. Like, why the porcupine symbol? Why the team mentality? Why the unwillingness to defend yourself when that's kind of one of the ideas behind the non-aggression principle, and it's one of the only ideas that really is used to enforce the non-aggression principle, that you know, we're going to be peaceful as long as you don't aggress. Like, it's not, we're going to be peaceful no matter what. Then what law is there in an anarchist society?
Defend yourself against what exactly?
Anything, any threat. I mean, is it okay to use a gun to shoot someone that robs you as long as they're not part of the monopoly on force? Should we bow down just because they have a monopoly? Is that...
I'll just briefly say, I think it's important to take reality into account. Yeah, maybe the morality of the argument would be that anyone who robs from you is unjust and could be defended against. But, like, hello, we all know the reality that cops, they, of course, badges don't grant extra rights, but when people perceive that they do, unfortunately, that's sort of part of the reality. I don't think it's practical to defend yourself against cops for that reason. Maybe not now. If we could just focus on pointing out the hypocrisy, maybe more people will see the injustice there. But
well, part of what I'm doing here is trying to point out that hypocrisy, and that if badges don't grant extra rights. I mean, I think everybody in this room probably already understands that part, okay? That, they are the same class of criminal that robs the liquor store, okay? So if people can understand that, it's not a far leap to understand that you're at least morally, philosophically, justified in using force against them. It's not a far jump to make. And the perceived legitimacy of the state is sort of levied in this idea that it's wrong to use force against them, that you're justified in defending yourself against a common criminal, but once he joins the public sector organized crime family, then it's immoral to use force against them or
ineffective.
Ineffective in this case. In this case, it is ineffective, and I've said that repeatedly, that in almost all cases it's going to be not a good idea. You're going to get yourself killed, and it's probably better off to live to fight another day. However, if we're having this conversation about getting rid of the state, well, force is a part of that equation, right? I mean, it's not an honest conversation.
Not at all.
No,
it's not at all. The state's just an idea, so you don't have to use force to get rid of an idea.
If the people who have that idea are using force, well, then at least the moral legitimacy of using force against them is part of that discussion, because it's wrong for them to use force against you, so you're right in using force to resist them. If people understand that goes a long way in delegitimizing the state. And the more people who understand that, well, then when people do use force against the state, as has happened before and will continue to happen, we all know that that's inevitable. So when people continue to do that, if people are educated to the philosophy of self-defense against state agents, then it won't be perceived as such a bad thing. You've talked before about, well, you're the lone nut, you're the gun nut, you're the bad guy because you killed the cop, when we know that that's not true. But if you want to change the public perception, what are we doing? You have a radio show, you have a podcast, I have a website. That's what we're supposed to be doing, is changing people's ideas. So if we're going to change people's ideas, well, why not change them to, hey, these people don't deserve to live if they're going to run around killing people?
Yeah, I want my listeners to live, so I'm not going to advocate that they fight cops with violence.
Okay, I want my readers to live, which is why I say, hey, you probably shouldn't go out and do this, but this is part of the conversation.
Why propagate that?
Bring it up.
Those ideas, because I know why your website is popular, Chris, because you're saying things that people think. There are a lot of people in this movement who think about violence against the police. And the more you think about it, the more you're likely to create that at some point. The more
I disagree with that.
Absolutely. The more you think about violence, the more likely something's going to happen in your life that will give you the opportunity to experience it. And the more you think about these ideas, the more likely you are to prepare for violence and arm up and get the body armor and start making bombs or whatever other going down that road. And you go down the road to becoming the crazy guy in the woods who shoots out against the police with a Bearcat and then ends up getting his house set on fire and burns alive. Whatever the story has been repeated so many times. Or you end up being Schaefer Cox, where you're plotting to kill some judge or some cop after they've hurt a friend of yours or arrested a friend of yours, and then before you know it, you end up in a prison cell or whatever. So I think that if you want to be, if peace is valuable to you, then you should have peaceful thoughts and not focus on violence at all. I think that that's very dangerous.
It sounds like Peter Pan. Think happy thoughts, right?
Yes, think happy thoughts.
But
it really works well.
But when you think happy thoughts, you do not fly. And when you think happy thoughts, it doesn't keep the armed men from burning down your house. It happens to people.
There are ways to prepare for bad situations that don't involve stockpiling weapons or training for target shooting, like just having barbecues and sharing food with your friends and neighbors, building a network of people who use two-way communications. There are so many ways to work on building peace that don't involve preparing for violence.
I agree that all of those methods are good things.
Right.
However, I say it's not a far leap to say, hey, maybe, a gun for me and a gun for my buddy, might be a thing to have. I'm not saying to go and, I think you'd be better off investing your money into things that will make you more money, go do Bitcoin, that sort of thing, than,
it's more
just
seditious.
Filling up the basement with weapons. I mean,
it's more seditious. It's more effective.
I completely agree with you.
Once you have enough people in one place who aren't willing to use violence and who are willing to be of peace and not obey, as soon as people stop obeying the state, as soon as people stop believing in the state, no amount of violence on their part is going to change that. That's why they're so violent with us, is because they want to crush what's happening here. They want to send a message that if you stand up, you're going to be cut down. So all you people, don't move to New Hampshire. And if you do move here, you certainly should keep your head down. That's what they want people to do. They want people to go through the system. They want people to obey. They want them to pay their taxes. But as we've seen, if enough people stop cooperating, if enough people don't take the plea deal, if enough people stop paying taxes on their property, they can't enact enough violence to do anything about it at all.
The same thing is true for use of force. If enough people resort to force, there's nothing they can do to stop the force.
But
it's the same
your
exact
means
concept.
is your end, and that's the thing that is such a critical component here. If you're going to use violence to achieve peace, you're going to fail every single time, and you're just going to foment more violence and just going to foment more anger. Whereas if you're using peace, you can get to where you want to go, which is toward peace. Peace is the way, as it has been
in theory,
said.
anyway. It's never worked out that way.
That's because everybody goes to violence.
Well, then what are you proposing?
Peace.
Peace. Oh, peace. Okay. Well, as I said before,
that may result in your life being ended.
Well, that doesn't sound very peaceful to me at all.
Sorry, it's a long road. Your life may be ended a very violent way, but you can still be at peace with that happening to you.
No.
I'm telling you can be.
They're mutually exclusive things.
You can deny it if you want to.
Violent death and peaceful life are two mutually exclusive concepts.
Peace is in here, brother. That's it. They can hurt you in whatever way they want to. If you keep yourself peaceful inside, then you're still at peace.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath that we're going to have the type of freedom that you would imagine in the future in your lifetime. And that's very sad if that's what you're holding out for. So I invite you to accept peace for that now, and rather than wait till after you're dead.
We've got a huge line of people here.
Johnson.
Right.
Sure. So, as someone who slaughters on a weekly basis thousands of aliens, zombies, hookers, and cops in a virtual world, I'm going to say that I definitely don't think that thinking about violence brings more violence. In fact, I've strongly advocated for peace before, and I support a peaceful way. But one of the things you said, Derrick, was about being judged as somebody who's dancing, and perhaps they misstep, but they've inspired someone perhaps to move in a different way. And sort of the same way I felt during this conversation we had at PorcFest during the summer, when we had this conversation before about violence, I feel that a lot of liberty activists do this, where you get into this nebulous territory where nothing is being measured by an objective standard. There's no metric to actually judge success by. And so I actually came up here originally asked this question of Derrick and Ian, but I changed my mind as I heard Chris talking about Brian Tan. So my question for you, Chris, actually is, do you feel that the liberty movement is growing now?
It's growing. It's unquestionably growing. Yes, it's not growing fast enough, but it is growing.
Do you feel that the liberty movement is largely and mostly peaceful now?
Depending on how we define peaceful, because obviously there's some difference of that definition at this
on
table.
our part.
Well, yes, we're not. We're obviously not going out and initiating force against people.
I put forward that that's the measurement of success. That's the metric that we need to measure things by.
Tim.
All right. you guys are talking about peace like it's Ian, and Derrick. You guys say it's on the inside, right? Well, that's true, but you have to ask a question like, what is Derrick? When you were supporting Obama, way back when, you were supporting him. Why? Because he represented peace, hope, and order in a world that you saw was chaotic, right?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah. So what was Martin Luther King to a statist? He was peace or order, right? So what we actually ended up with was chaos, because what people's idea of order is to have everything in this sort of this top-down situation, because that's all they understand. But when you run around violently, you end up promoting chaos. Now, why do people who carry guns openly, why do they carry them? They don't carry them to find criminals and shoot them via vigilante. They carry guns so they don't have to use them. When a criminal pulls out a gun, he sees the gun, he's like, oh shoot. It's to promote peace. It's maintenance of that. So what I think that we should be doing, to promote peace is we shouldn't be fighting or even trying to promote the idea of killing people or war or any of that. We should be promoting the idea of order. We should be making as much order as possible, not from the top down, but from a voluntary basis on a flat level. I mean, you promote that, peace will come about. And if you're concerned about the government existing, the government's pyramid scheme, they only exist because people don't know how to live in order any other way. Government is like this machine which generates chaos with the intent of it looking like, oh, see, we're solving the chaotic problem. But they're generating chaos in and of itself. Now, they might stop someone else's chaos to make them look good, but they're still generating chaos. We should be creating as much order as possible. People will just lose faith in it.
I totally agree. And we need to create alternatives to the institutions out there and create a mindset that's very, very different, and just get people out of that belief in statism. Stop talking about we are going to war and we are doing this and that, because it's not us. We're not the state. We don't believe in the state, or at least I hope you don't believe in the state. I don't want to speak for you, but I don't believe in the state. The state's a terrible idea, and the more that we can propagate that, I think the more that will help propagate peace, because peace is an external thing, but it starts inside. You have to, right. As Gandhi is infamous for saying, be the change you wish to see. And that's what that's all about, is being peaceful on the inside will manifest into more peace in the world.
I think it was an interesting thing that you touched on in the beginning of your statement there, was that, all right, if peace is a state of mind, right, then all of the Obama supporters who are still under the impression that Obama ended the wars, then those people are peaceful people? Are they at peace?
They are at peace.
Or they at least believe that they are.
So if peace is a state of mind and you enable a warmonger, then you're at peace.
No, but in reality, peace is not being promoted. Jesus, if you're going to quote Gandhi, I feel like I can quote Jesus.
Please.
Okay, Jesus said, do not resist an evil man. And it's because if you resist somebody, you're promoting, if he attacks you, if you fight back, you're giving him the response he wants. You're promoting violence. But here's a better thought. If you don't have to defend yourself because someone else is defending you, someone who's not even necessarily part of your group is defending you, then whoever's attacking you has already lost, because there's nothing they can do at that point to promote their chaos, their ideas, their violence.
I would disagree that an attacker wants you to resist. I think that pretty much every study of crime that you can find will...
If he's bad.
He definitely does.
He does, because it makes him look good for what he's doing.
No, he doesn't.
Barry Cooper from Never Get Busted. Do you know Barry?
No, not personally.
He actually came to Liberty Forum a few years ago. Really cool guy. Former narcotics operative from Texas, turned to the side of good, started making DVDs about how to never get busted. Tips for drug users, basically. And Barry talked on Free Talk Live with us about his experiences being a police officer when he first got out on the streets. He said he would get an adrenaline rush just pulling somebody over for just a traffic stop. But eventually that adrenaline rush went away. So he had to come up with new ways to seek that. And one of the things that he would do is if, let's say, he caught somebody for some cocaine or something like that, he'd leave them sitting on the side of the road and accidentally forget to cuff them, or, leave the handcuffs undone or something like that. Give them the reason to, or give them the chance to get up and run. So he'd have the excuse to run after them and beat the shit out of them. So there's definitely police out there who are looking for people to resist.
Well, there are people out there who just want to get into fights. That exists not only in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. I mean, I've been in bars where somebody just wanted to go hit somebody, and I've been the guy he hit. So I understand that there are people like that out there, but they are in the minority. Most people who want to steal, police included, just want to be able to take what they want. They don't want to be resisted. And it's the last thing they want is to get shot and not go home to their wife at the end of the day.
Tim, thank you. I got to move this along because we are getting close to, this is a really good panel and it's going strong, but
Totally
lunch
fine.
is coming up. Thank you.
I perceive a broad consensus that in the moral realm, we are fully justified in using force to defend ourselves against agents of the state, and that in the practical realm, most of the time, that's ineffective. And so I have a proposal that we take the focus away from the minions of the state and go directly to what the essence of the state is. So for roughly half of the time, since where we're standing and sitting right now was covered by a mile of ice, for roughly half of that vast stretch of time, the state has existed. And in all of the examples that I'm aware of in that vast stretch of time, the essence of the state has been a very few people, usually men, but very few people have lived high off the hog at the expense of everybody else. And so I think that the focus should be on making life hell for the direct ultimate beneficiaries of the state. Not necessarily for the intermediate people who benefit from the state, but the ultimate beneficiaries. When you take the pyramid all the way to the apex, the people who benefit. And that does not necessarily entail violence. It could entail something as simple as the annual Bilderberg protests that have been going on the last few years, or anything of that nature. I think that people are spinning their wheels in the mud here because there's this notion of, it's a scenario where your house gets raided and, in the heat of the moment, you may or may not prevail. But thinking where you're not on the defensive, but where you're on the offensive, the most effective thing would not necessarily be necessarily raiding a jail and freeing people, but directing the wrath of everybody here, all liberty-minded people in the world at the ultimate beneficiaries of the state.
I disagree completely. I don't have any wrath towards the state.
Not necessarily violent.
I love them. No, I'm not even talking about violence, wrath or anger or whatever, or frustration. I'm not angry at them anymore. I forgive them. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're misguided, and I love them, and I want to show them that I love them as many opportunities as I possibly can, because I think that's going to solve things. You can go out and wave signs at Bilderberg all you want, and they're going to arrive in their limousines with their staff, and they're going to protect themselves from you, and nothing's going to change as a result of that. If you want to get rid of the state, you have to change people's minds, and we can get rid of the state as soon as people stop believing in it. And if you're out there yelling and protesting, then that means that you at least appear to be believing in it, and so you're only going to propagate them, I think.
I would say that going to Bilderberg, these sorts of things, look, go ahead, do it. I'm sort of a conspiracy theorist. I don't listen to Alex Jones, but if things are sourced well enough, then I will look at source material, and I think that there's a lot of evidence that there's a lot of people behind the scenes who are doing things that we're not supposed to be paying attention to, and that's fine to look at that. However, those people would have nothing if not for the men with guns outside of the building, right? Because if the police or whoever guards the Bilderberg meeting didn't want to show up for work for fear of being killed, then there wouldn't be a Bilderberg meeting.
You said, quote, make life hell for the beneficiaries of the state. I'd posit it would be more worth your time to make life well for your neighbors.
Yeah. So implicit in what I was saying is that we use our brains and find clever ways to bypass the people who would be shielding them or whatever. I mean, in whatever, I mean, be creative, but find ways to just cut the cops and everybody between them and the ultimate beneficiaries, cut them out and just find ways to make life uncomfortable or anything like that. Because they're the people that are aggressing against us. They're the ultimate initiators of all this aggression.
You can guarantee they're already uncomfortable by the fact that we're here doing this, the Free State Project. That is making them uncomfortable. Look at what Cynthia Chase said, the state representative, saying that Free Staters are the single greatest threat to the state. Now, I haven't threatened anybody. I don't want to threaten anybody. I just want to love my neighbors. And my neighbors, in some cases, believe in the state. So threatening them or trying to make life hell on them, it's not my intention. I just want to live free. And if they want to feel like that's a problem, then I can't affect how they feel. I'm just going to seek my own personal freedom. I'm going to support my friends and neighbors. I'm not going to bear any animosity towards them.
Thank you. I'm going to try and run through these real quick. One, we've been talking about false choices, and one of them that keeps getting repeated is the idea that if you violently resist, it's automatically a death sentence and you will not be successful. That's not true, and there are examples of success. I'm not going to go into them, but certainly the odds are against you, but it's not a foregone conclusion, just as it's not a foregone conclusion that if you comply, you're going to make it. We had a gentleman, of course, just get arrested, showed up at the jail. Oh, he was fine when we put him in handcuffs and took him away in the car. Now he's got a broken neck and may not live. Oh, gee, that happens. Once you've decided that you're going to let them place shackles on you, okay, you're not just making the decision that I'm not going to defend myself right now. You're making the decision that you're giving up that option for who knows how long. People were, there was some Bible quotes, so, I'll just run there with Proverbs, strong man armed keepeth his goods in peace. Running along with that is Machiavelli, who said that the man who is unarmed is despised by the man who is. And that's a fact. I can tell you in my own personal experiences dealing with police officers that there's a large difference in the way that they look at you, the way that they interact with you when I'm standing there armed and when they're not, which is why when I went to court in Concord, we know here we have some police officers act as prosecutors. And he came up to me and wanted to discuss my case. And I said, well, are you going to drop the charges? No. Well, then I don't think there's anything to talk about. But he insisted, right, that we should discuss my case. And I said, well, let's not pretend that we're on equal footing here. The fact of the matter is that your friends downstairs disarmed me before I came into this building, and you're standing there with a gun, and you want to act like we're going to have an even-keel conversation. So I'll tell you what, if you really want to talk to me, you can go take off your firearm, and we can have a conversation, or we can go out to the parking lot, I'll put my firearm back on, and we can have a conversation. Of course, he's unwilling to do either of those things because he understands, right, the real power disparity that he has at his advantage. So how did we get here? There was a time when, how did we get to a place where people are not 40%, 50%, 60%, 70% of their productivity is stolen from them? There was a time when revenuers would show up hanging from a tree. Now, right now, of course, sure, it's impractical to hang a revenuer, but maybe we ended up here because people stopped.
Or maybe that tactic didn't work. I want to comment on your statement about being treated differently because you have a gun. I've never openly carried a firearm, and I think that I get treated differently, but in a different way. I get treated with respect from a lot of police officers in town, and I don't know, maybe it's because I've stood up for myself. I think that people who stand up for themselves and are confident, that's the number one factor in how the police treat you. If you're shrinking down, you're not really confident about yourself, you're not making good eye contact with them versus looking straight at them, standing up straight and telling them like it is and giving them your opinion, I think that's the number one thing, especially if they've seen you actually been arrested for the things that you believe in. I think that there's, whether it's a begrudging respect, I don't know, but I mean, I'm sure each officer would have to comment on that, but I feel like it's that confidence is the factor. And maybe people having a gun makes them feel more confident. Whether that's always true, I don't know.
I would go ahead and say that I think in limited interactions that I've had with law enforcement in New Hampshire, I think that they've been a lot more respectable to me, even when I'm not carrying. just because in New Hampshire, in comparison to New York, just because they recognize that in New Hampshire there's a pretty good possibility that you're armed, whereas in New York they think it's unheard of for a man to carry a weapon, and they'll abuse you. I mean, when I was a kid, they'd grab my friends and drop them off in the bad neighborhood, and you'd get out of the police car in front of a gang of Bloods and Crips. They seem to be a little bit more cautious when there's a potential for the person to be armed than when they've already been disarmed. And as Ian said, if you're standing up to any bully, because it's all a cop is, he's a bully, you stand up to any bully, whether it's verbally or aggressively or physically, they tend to back off, and that's always been the case with anybody. They want to pick on somebody who won't resist them in any way.
Right, and they're going to back off more when a bunch of us are standing up peacefully.
Or forcefully.
I think you're wrong about that. I think they're going to ramp up their force if you use force against them. But anyway, any more comments, William?
Yeah, just really quick. The idea that thinking about or preparing for violence invites that flies in the face of, well, basically all martial arts theories, and not to mention the biblical verse that I just put out there. But
I think there's a difference between being prepared and obsessed.
Aggression, as you said, the confidence and the strong front. But what makes a lot of people confident in situations is training. And that confidence allows them to portray an aura that deters further violence, where otherwise they might not. And maybe some people are able to project that without training.
I appreciate what you're saying, and maybe I should clarify what I was saying. I think it's the obsession over fantasizing about violence. That when I'm talking about thinking, I'm not saying like you're thinking about, protecting your family from some crazed killer and you're, taking them to classes for that sort of purpose, martial arts or whatever. There's a difference between being prepared and obsessed. And I think an obsessive sort of thing would be a prepper, right? Like somebody who's constantly, that's their life. That's what they're obsessed over. And if you're dreaming about violence against the state, if you're daydreaming about it, if you find yourself off in those thoughts when you see stories about the state using violence, that's the kind of thinking that I don't want to think those things. I don't want to think about violent thoughts. That doesn't mean that it's wrong to be prepared if violence does visit you. I hope that's some sort of clarification.
It does, and just final thing, and Derrick mentioned this specifically, the badges don't grant extra rights. So this is going to actually end up on a question. Do you think that, not to make it a collectivist, but do you think maybe that you would or should stop saying that phrase or promoting that phrase when it seems clear that they obviously do? Not only do they, if you're suggesting that we have to be realistic, okay, then let's be realistic. The fact is that they do grant extra rights. Not only that, but your verbiage up here has suggested that you agree with treating them differently than you would someone without a badge. And so not only do they in real life, but you're encouraging that.
You make a great point, and thanks for bringing that up. I think if we replay the tape, you'll notice that when I said that, I started to sputter, that I was starting to have some cognitive dissonance, saying that, yeah, maybe I should stop saying that phrase. And that, as I'm even saying this now, it's upsetting because I have this affinity for cop block, and that's their motto. But that gives me something to think about. Thank you, William.
Well, just because somebody gets away with something doesn't mean they have a right to it. So badges don't grant extra rights, but people have belief systems that allow the people with the badges to get away with doing violence. Rights are an idea, and they're a darn good idea. They're an idea that we should share, and we should have the same ideas about what rights are so we can respect those same concepts amongst all of our human beings. Unfortunately, many of our friends and family members have different ideas about men with badges than we do. We can change that perception, I think, by showing them for what they can be, which is violent people who do hurt peaceful people, and we do a great job of that here in Keene. And you can really show that clearly, as Derrick pointed up earlier, by remaining peaceful in the face of their violence. If you are at peace, when Derrick was arrested if you've seen Victimless Crime Spree, was arrested in the park for attempting to smoke marijuana, had he started flailing about and trying to attack the police and, defend himself, he has a right to be there in that park and smoke that pot. He has a right to not be molested by those police. So Derrick would have been totally justified in pulling out a Gatling gun and mowing down every single cop that was attempting to put him in a cage, because damn it, it's his rights. But what would that have looked like to the people who were trying to convince, the people whose minds that were trying to change, the hearts and the minds? They would have said, that crazy kid, he deserved everything he got, because they probably would have ended his life at some point shortly thereafter. And then they would have blown him off as somebody who's completely meaningless. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't think Derrick's crazy, but there are more people who can empathize with him, who can see, wow, that wasn't right what those police did, because it wasn't right what they did, and it's easier to see that when you remain at peace, when you're loving towards the police, when you're not angry. I'm not even talking about just violence, but also anger in general, because I think it's anger and fear that leads to violence. So if you can be loving in the face, as I've seen Russell do so many times, where he's got a big smile on his face and is just talking with the police like it's no big deal, then you can show the people who are watching who the real violent people are.
But if you're talking about trying to change people's minds, and that's absolutely the goal, right? Like if I mentioned earlier, if I had the force of arms, I'd just go get Bradley Manning out of prison, and Ian pointed out, well, that wouldn't stop people from going to prison, and he's right. There's no point in overthrowing an elected government and then holding an election. It would be a fairly pointless thing to do. That's why I try to shy away from the word revolution these days, because that tends to imply that you're going to do exactly that, and that would be completely pointless. But if we're trying to change people's minds, you're saying the problem with Derrick defending himself, when a cop runs him off the road on a bicycle and punches him in the face on your neighbor's lawn, the reason it's not good for him to defend himself is because there's a public perception that he has no right to do that. So if we're trying to change public perceptions, and the perception that we want to give people is that badges don't grant extra rights, then part of that conversation is, or should be, that it is justified to use the force against them. And if we leave that out, and for the most part, most libertarian propaganda does leave that part out. If we leave that part out, then people will continue to have that perception that a person is unjustified in defending themselves, and then when they do, then they will be the lone nut prepper lunatic that you keep on referring to. But if you're trying to change perceptions, it would stand to reason that this should be the perception that one wishes to change.
I don't want to promote that it's justified to do those things. I mean, because like I said, you can justify...
I certainly wouldn't force you to.
You can justify violence all the time. There's all kinds of justifications for violence. Look at, there's all kinds of reasons to be violent. But they won't accomplish your goals if your goal is peace.
So just real quickly, I want you guys to either say that you agree or disagree with the following quote. We can never obtain peace in the outer world until we make peace with ourselves.
Totally agree.
Agree.
I agree with that, but that's not when peace comes either. You have to deal with the outside forces that interrupt your peace.
For whom?
Another quote, agree or disagree. World peace must develop from inner peace. Peace is not just mere absence of violence. Peace is, I think, the manifestation of human compassion.
Yes, I agree.
I agree to that.
Peace, I agree with most of it, but it is not it is not simply the manifestation of compassion. It is more complex than that, because there are outside forces. You can be as compassionate as you want, and when you have compassion in your heart and men put bullets through it, that is not peace.
Chris, during a conversation about a year and a half ago, I think, you made reference to some guy that mowed down the tax assessor and I think the county attorney,
Carl Draga,
as like a example of quote unquote living free. Can you explain that just a little bit, and then I have a follow-up question?
I'm not sure that I explained that. I'm not sure the context that was brought up in a year and a half ago, and it was probably when I was wasted on whiskey at the CAC at some point.
You were.
So I don't remember exactly what the conversation was, but I would say that stories like Carl Draga is a guy who was really pushed to the limit by the state, and he reacted violently, and it's predictable. Whether you think it's right or wrong is irrelevant to whether or not it's predictable. It's garbage going to happen, whether anybody likes it or not. So how do you want to deal with those things? Well, you can go and you can say that, Carl Drago was some lone gun nut who just, freaked out and murdered a bunch of people. Or you can say, hey, what did you think was going to happen when you came and took his property, when you took his house, when you threatened him with guns? What did you think was going to happen, except that he would react violently? And I think if we treat Carl Drago and other people who have been pushed to the edge by the state with a little bit more sympathy in post-mortem, to say, yeah, this is predictable. Stop doing these things to these people or they're going to react violently. And each of us have a line that can happen. And I think that it would be better to treat those situations that way than, oh, well, that crazy nut, screw him.
Would you say that Christopher Dorner was living free when he started randomly offing police officers that he used to work with?
I think Christopher Dorner was a lunatic Obama supporter.
Okay, and finally, a quote from the movie Princess Bride that a lot of people really love, and it really ties in with this, and I really only want Chris's opinion on this. Chris, after you do somehow miraculously overthrow the state with the use of force, there's a quote from Inigo Montoya who said, "Is very strange. I have been in the revenge business so long. Now that it is over, I don't know what to do with the rest of my life." What would you do with the rest of your life after you get the revenge that you seek?
Well, I probably keep on writing jokes and shit. I do a lot more than talk about violence against the state. This is not my entire life, guys. It tends to come up entirely too frequently because it's like a controversial subject. But, if you read my website, there's, 250 plus articles on it, and a lot of them about economics and humor and sex and all types of shit, So if there's nobody levying force against me, I'm certainly not going to be initiating force against anybody else. I'll be really happy when there's no more state, when people don't come around and take my property and lock me in cages and fuck with my car and make me wear their stupid tags on my car and shit. I'm really going to be happy when all of that happens, and then I can write and make videos about other things.
I think there's a disparity between peace and the definition that you each hold, and I think, Chris, you talk about it like it's a nebulous ether that surrounds us, as if peace is this floating bubble around us. No, but peace is something inside an individual. There are only things within individuals. There is only individual feelings, emotions, and actions. And so when we talk about peace, peace is something an individual acquires within themselves or manifests within themselves. And peace is all around you because it's in the people you're sitting right next to. So if you're looking for peace, you are in the midst of it, my friend. And you are among it, and it is here right now.
Well, okay, so it goes back to that peace is a state of mind thing. Well, if that's true, then I can have an inner state of peace while I fire on people with a weapon, right? If it's just a thing inside of you, and then I could be like, I have compassion in my heart as I open fire on military bases. It's peace is actually happening or actually not happening. It is the absence of violence, and if you are being coerced and having violence levied against you, I'm sorry. I paid a tax to stay in this hotel. It's right here. This hotel is taxed.
We're at noon right
now.
But I do think that the people that are currently standing in line should each get to ask their question.
I agree. I intend to continue this till we're done with the questions, so obviously it is lunchtime.
JJ actually hit on something, started the conversation that I wanted to ask about. What I'm seeing, and I've been kind of pacing in the back of the room for a while, listening to everything that's been said, I've seen references to whether the movement has advanced and whether it's good for the movement and that sort of thing. And what I'm hearing is a disparity between what's good for the individual, what's good for the movement, and there doesn't seem to be anything about how we can make, or I don't want to say make because I don't want to force, how can we bring together what is good for the individuals, which I think Chris is the one who's been kind of presenting the individualist side, and what is good for the movement. I'm certainly not going to give my life for the movement. That's not going to happen, but I have been in the past been a pacifist. I have never owned a firearm. I have done some things in more or less a peaceful way, but I've also been a member of the military. Can you speak to just as not all Republicans believe with every plank of the Republican platform, Democrats the same way, FSP the same way. Just because you're a member of the FSP does not mean you necessarily agree 100% with each plank in the platform or in the description. Can each of you address the problem of bringing together what is good for the movement and what is good for the individual?
All right, I'll start off, and I think it's a really great and important question because I constantly get this. You're hurting the movement. And
Me too.
I hate that because everybody, well, yeah, exactly. They say it to me and they say it to Ian, and it's like, does anybody like reach a certain level of has a voice and doesn't get that said to them, right? Because as soon as anybody starts listening to you, somebody disagrees with you and says, you're hurting the movement. And it's ridiculous, right? Because first of all, I think that the liberty movement kind of gets confused with the Ron Paul campaign in a lot of ways, too, because obviously you've got these different factions of people with different ideas and different interests sort of coming together around that goal, and I think that was a good thing for liberty. And then there's, within that, people who want to abolish the state, people who say, well, we need to get the state back in line, and, good luck with that. But I think that if the movement is, at least for me, about individual freedom, then what's good for the individual is good for the movement necessarily, so long as it's within the context of non-aggression. And as far as the aggregate effect of things, I mean, it's good or bad. How do you measure that? I would say that if you're getting the message out to people, that's a positive thing. So, I say kind of shocking, controversial things and, tell some off-color jokes. And, some people have, especially recently, taken a great deal of offense to that and gone kind of crazy about it. But at the same time, if you're getting other ideas in front of people at the same time, then I'd say that it's a net positive, and everybody just has to do what works for them is my opinion on it.
How to reconcile what's good for the movement and what's good for individuals? Well, I say you are the movement. Everyone in this room right now is the movement. And the answer is to look inside yourself, to thine own self be true, and what is good for you, I think, is, since you are the movement, is ultimately what is the best.
So, as somebody who came to this movement based on liberty and individual rights, obviously they hold a real soft spot in my heart. However, as somebody who has also come to the conclusion, sort of a metaphysical from a spiritual perspective, that we're all not disconnected, we're all actually connected, we're all part of this great organism. You can call it God if you would like, the universe, or the universe experiencing itself. I want a better universe. I want a universe that is more of peace and love, and so to me, my life is dedicated to that. I'm a minister in the Shire Free Church, and my life is dedicated to those ideas. And as I was touching on before, when we became activists who are public about our beliefs and non-cooperative and things like that, we're putting our life on the line for whatever reason, whatever your motivations are for doing it. For me, if I end up dying at the hands of some police or whatever, I'm okay with that. I'm fine. I knew that coming into it, that could be one of the consequences of doing activism. But if I can go out and have a positive effect on the world, then that's a win. And if I've helped bring people to the ideas of liberty, if I walk out of here and get hit by a bus, that's okay. That's okay. I don't have to live another day in order to be effective for liberty and peace in our lifetime. I'm pretty satisfied with what I've already accomplished. I look and intend to accomplish more, and I hope I have the opportunity to do that. But if I get struck down, then that's how it goes. I'm not really worried about it. And so my own individual life isn't really that important to me anymore.
Well, I've certainly accepted that it's a possibility that, I could get struck down in the course of doing this, but I would far prefer to keep my life, and I'm not at all okay with people taking
There's
it.
beautiful sunrises to watch and all kinds of wonderful things to experience and people to meet who I really appreciate. But for me, it's not all about my life. because my life is there's a greater mission for me. You know, I want to have a positive experience. I want the world to be a better place when I leave it. And if I become violent, then I don't believe that it will be a better place.
Let me. We had spoken briefly about a lot of people in this movement are Stefan Molyneux fans, and I think that we had discussed a little bit. I think what Stefan is really proposing is a multi-generational solution, and this is part of what leads me to the question of force, because I think that multi-generational solutions are a terrible idea that mean all of us die as slaves, we raise our children as slaves, and they probably die that way too, and there's really, you know, just the hope and prayer of success sometime in the future. And we had spoke about that a little bit, and would you mind addressing the multi-generational
I think it's a terrible idea. I think it's an excuse for doing nothing. The idea that having sex and having children is going to solve, the problems of human freedom, I think is pretty ridiculous, because the people who believe in the state are also having sex with one another and having children. So you're not going to outnumber them by multiplying. So I think that's just the basis of this multi-generational approach, at least as I understand it. I don't really listen to much Stefan Molyneux, but I know a lot of people are big fans of him. That's just always how it's come to me, is like, oh, well, let's talk about peaceful parenting and have some babies. And I think that we're going to need to do more than that. But on the other hand, I also know that even if we do get rid of the idea of the state in our lifetime, and I hope that we do, that's not going to necessarily mean that everything's going to be at peace. There's still going to be individuals who aggress against others. There's still going to be anger. So to me, my purpose is larger than just ending the idea of the state. The state is a manifestation. Okay, so the state is an idea. It's what exists. Yes, there are cars. There are men with badges and guns and uniforms. But ultimately, the idea of the state is a manifestation of sort of the collective consciousness of people's fears and their anger and their belief that by creating this structure and these rules and the lawyers and the police, that will somehow put everything right with the world. And until everything's right on the inside, as we've touched on a number of times, it will never be right in the world. So we have to be at peace. I don't know. I'm rambling at this point.
I'll just get it out of the way that I completely agree that the idea has to be eliminated, that it can't just be done by force. I recognize that.
Right, because they'll keep recreating it.
Yes, I appreciate all of the peaceful efforts. I appreciate what Stefan Molyneux does. I appreciate the peaceful parenting angle. I appreciate civil disobedience. I'm not a guy who discourages any of that. It's all necessary.
I can't cite the exact law, but it's funny you are talking about fucking for liberty, essentially. My understanding.
Which I'm all for too.
Yeah, I'm not saying don't do that, but it's not gonna fix things.
Well,
attack on all fronts.
Raising your own kingdom, and my understanding from my criminal law class is that's actually the basis of the laws against polygamy currently. That's the underlying cause of it. I do have another humorous question. I would be interested to know what all of you, actually, Chris, I don't need to know your answer, but Ian and Derrick, I would like to know what you both would do in the event of a zombie apocalypse. And
you have to love the zombies.
It depends.
They're just hurting inside.
So zombie apocalypse, if it came to being a zombie or taking my own life, I'd kill myself.
Really? Your answer has changed, because I think
what was it before?
You said you'd waste them. Like
you wouldn't kill zombies?
Well, years ago.
Well, hold on. There's nothing wrong with wasting a zombie because they're not a human being. And they don't have a soul or consciousness.
But you personally?
But if it comes down to where I can't waste enough of them, you know what I mean? Like if they're closing in on me and it's imminent.
You would eat a bullet? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I understand.
Dude, haven't you seen Walking Dead? After you die, you come back as a zombie either way.
Not if you put one in your head.
Oh, that's right. You're right. You win.
Yeah, I'd fight my way out. I think I'd fight it.
You couldn't get out. What if they're closing in?
I have a feeling I just wouldn't have an access to a firearm at that point. I just would probably have to just accept it. I'd make peace.
Come over to the dark side.
All right, can we move on?
Yes, I'm sorry. The only other comment that I had is it's not black or white kind of thing for me. Violence versus peace. I consider myself a peaceful person. Though I live in a maelstrom of chaos, I seem to keep some sort of air of confidence and calm assuredness about me. But that does not mean that I'm not profoundly affected when I see my activist friends being taken down by the state. Tally seeing Tally dragged across the floor was one of, I wrote a blog post about it. It's the only blog post I've written as a liberty activist, right? Where it was my red pill to see Tally dragged across this floor. And my visceral reaction is to attack the person who is attacking my friend. And I could not do that. Can't kick down a locked door. So while Ian, I respect that you would not defend yourself against force, I certainly would, and I'm not sure that that's actually a choice for me. That's my observation.
Okay. I don't want to control you. I don't want to try to tell you what to do. All I can do is control myself and affect how I feel. And I want to feel at peace.
I too want to feel at peace. And I just want to say I want to thank you guys for having the balls to say a lot of things that bounce around inside my head. All three of you that I normally wouldn't. That being said, the Free State Project, the end, no government, let's say that was what, I don't want to, I'll stick with the zombie apocalypse / whatever it is. If that was to happen tomorrow, what could you do right? How would that affect you right now? And, what would you, there will be, not all of us are non-aggressive. There's other people that live in the state. There's going to be chaos, and if something was like that to happen, if that's, you watch those zombie movies, there's all kinds of chaos going around, If that was to happen, how can you defend your, you have to be, defend what I've built for my family to, I will never aggress against anyone, but if you come to my land and try to fuck with my children, I will. Do you see where, what is your answer to if the shit does hit the fan and it ended tomorrow like you wanted, then what? If
the proverbial poo hits the fan tomorrow, it's too late. I don't think it's in my opinion that the foundation hasn't been laid securely enough yet, and it would be a disaster. That would be a real bad thing. I just think we need to lay that foundation, and that really lights a fire under my butt. The fact that there are days where if it happened too soon, the shit hit the fan tomorrow. That's a real problem, and so that's what gives me a lot of motivation to work hard every day to get the ideas out to as many people as possible. It's some real life motivation.
What you guys are doing, in my eyes, and not to mention the feds pushing themselves, it is happening, I think, in my opinion, faster. What are you going to do if you're not ready to kick some ass and live off your land and provide for your own self? How can you survive
if
in
people are
Manchester?
not willing to defend themselves, then a new government will form, rather simply. You're going to have a situation where people are like, oh, there's a power vacuum, and we're going to step in and we're going to do that. Now, as we've talked about before, we're trying to lay the intellectual groundwork where people have sort of an understanding of non-aggression and economics and that sort of thing. And, if people understand that, then they'll just cooperate and we don't have to worry about that. But, of course, that has not as of yet occurred. If the SHTF tomorrow, then what's going to happen the day after tomorrow is the blue helmets are going to come in, and it's going to be the UN and some global currency and all sorts of madness.
But I think what I'm trying to say though is because if you're having people move here get the movers here for this, what happens then with this? There's no, where's the answer?
Let's just come back real quick to the original question. If the shit hits the fan, I don't like the idea of living into that reality. I understand that there's some people who feel they need to prepare for that, and I don't begrudge them. I've got some food in my basement, but it's not like a crazy amount of it. But I think that the shit has hit the fan. If you want to look at Watertown, Massachusetts, where there were militarized police and bearcats with machine guns coming into people's neighborhoods, stationing themselves out front of people's homes and pointing machine guns at their homes, and ordering them to evacuate and looking through people's houses and things like that. To me, that's the shit hitting the fan right there. And what did people do? They just stood by and they did exactly what they were told to do. Nobody grabbed a video camera. They even chanted it on. So I think that what we're doing now is we're bringing the people together to where that wouldn't play out the same way in New Hampshire. I don't think that it would play out I hope that it wouldn't play out the same way. I hope that we would have people say, no, you don't get to search my house. What are you talking about? While holding a video camera, while having their friends come over because they just dialed Keene 411 or Pork 411, or got on their two-way radios and let their neighbors know, because we have so many people that we're living so close by to one another that we can respond. I don't yet have a point where there's multiple houses on my street that are owned by Free Staters, but I sure would like that. Man, would I love to have neighbors like this and you and nearby me. Because I think that that would completely change what happens in the event of some sort of horrible occurrence.
Well, I don't necessarily want to say when shit hits the fan more than the dollar being less and less. That will be the shit hitting the fan in my eyes.
I
dollar
agree with you,
isn't
Laura.
worth
Yeah.
crap.
That's-
But how are you going to get water and
Stick
food?
around. Bitcoin panel coming up later.
Yeah, that is the one that I'm real concerned about too. And just to be quick about an answer, in my neighborhood, I know that I've laid my groundwork to know my neighbors, and if the dollar was suddenly worthless, we would be looking out for each other. And in the same way, I think New Hampshire, which has a culture of neighborliness, would play out very differently than in some major cities.
2 more questions.
Okay, Ian and Derrick, you guys said that peace is in the inside of you, all right?
That's where it starts.
Yeah, that's where it starts. What is the outgrowth of the peace within you, and what is the outgrowth of violence, as well as defensive aggression, I guess is the best way to put it?
No such thing as defensive aggression. It's either defensive force or aggressive force. It's one of the two.
Yes, okay, fine. Whatever, just the outgrowth of violence and the outgrowth of peace. What do you guys believe that is?
I think it's pretty clear that violence begets violence. I mean, certainly the history of violence, and peace is a relatively untraveled road, one that is not tried by many. And I think that as we've said repeatedly here, that peace starts on the inside and it manifests outward. It's not an immediate manifestation. We can sit here at peace and Obama's still dropping bombs on people. So it's kind of this, as I mentioned before, and I know libertarians don't like this term, but collective consciousness, the people, as a whole, and their general beliefs, what is manifesting into reality is a very violent reality.
Well, again, with me, it's not a question of peace or force, right? I mean, it's not a question of peace or violence. The violence is here, and you're either dealing with it or you're not. And what I didn't say they were opposite. Yeah, the fact of the matter is that there is no state of peace. When there is a state of peace, well, I'd really like to see it. I don't foresee that happening anytime soon, at the very least. My primary concern is the abolition of the state. So I'm not necessarily trying to solve all mankind's problems here. I have a very specific goal in mind, and if other people have other goals in mind, then that's a wonderful thing, and I hope that they pursue them. But if you want violence, well, clearly you're going to find violence. I don't desire it, and I don't think that anybody should desire it, but I think that everybody should be trying to come to terms with it, because it exists within your society. It is affecting you. If you stayed in this hotel, you paid a tax. That was violence. It was you had violence levied against you. When you pay your hotel bill, you're having violence levied against you. If you're paying income taxes, you're having violence levied against you. If you're using Federal Reserve notes, you're participating in violence. So all of these things are violent, and the way to, I don't know exactly how we get rid of them, but start coming to terms with them anyway.
Yeah, what does peace look like? It starts from inside, and this is one of the problems I have a lot with Peace News now, is I need to make catchy-looking graphics, and it's so hard to put a graphic of peace. What does it look like?
Especially because you're always talking about violent things that are happening.
That's tough too. And so what does it look like? Is it a hug? Is it mending wounds? Is it just sharing food? There's not one thing, and so you have to just know it. It's something that you know inside. And but the converse of that is we know pretty clearly what is violence, and you can explore that, and so limit your participation and consent to violence.
We've gone a half an hour over here. This will be the last question.
Okay. So I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about in listening to this conversation is specifically I brought up before having a observable, measurable metric for success, and that being the growth of the liberty movement. And one of the things that went through my head as you're talking is talking about doing things for the liberty movement. And I read a lot of Ayn Rand, and so I kind of think in terms a lot, especially when someone talks about doing something for a collective, of the virtue of selfishness. And especially in liberty-minded circles, when you're talking about doing something for a collective, you're not actually talking about doing something selflessly for a collective. It's a selfish action. And it's you're doing it because you're motivated. You want that collective, that group to succeed because it's a reflection of your personal values. And so the sort of ultimate selfish act would be an act of defensive force because you're defending your own life, right? That's a selfish action. So, really the ultimate selfish action because you're defending yourself, you're defending your life. So my question would be, because you've talked, Ian and Derrick and Chris, you've talked about all of you have come under circumstances where it might be reasonable to defend your life against, take a defensive force action against law enforcement, against the government. And you've come to very different conclusions to whether or not that's successful. And I believe those are for selfish reasons. So the question comes into sort of, Ian, you said what happens afterwards is one of the things that you brought up. So I guess my question would be, what's more important, revenge or growing the liberty movement?
I'll pick anything over revenge. I mean, for me, the motivation isn't about the movement, but more about propagating peace on Earth. And so, yeah, that's a selfish motivation. I want a peaceful world, even if I'm not there to experience it, because, again, I think that everything's connected and that I can be a positive influence on things. And that's what I want to be. I want to be a positive influence on things. And that is coming from a selfish perspective, but more of a larger selfish, like, the higher self. If I'm here as an individuated little bit of consciousness, a bit of a piece of a larger consciousness, then I'm still doing it for myself. If everybody here is a piece of God, for instance, then by being loving towards my fellow men and women, and that's a selfish act, to die in a hail of gunfire without firing back, without being violent in return. I think there's virtue in not destroying life, and if I can avoid that, I'm going to try to do that. And ultimately, that's selfish because it propagates life. From that perspective, I hope that answered the question.
For me, I mean, if we're talking about defending yourself, that has nothing to do with revenge, right? I mean, if a guy's going to come and put you in a cage and ultimately be the end of your life, at least as you know it, and you kill the guy, there's no revenge involved here. I mean, if these guys stop doing it and you decide to go out and say, well, we're going to go hang all the police, well, that's sort of vengeful.
Well, I'm talking really more about the outcome of what happens when you do something like that. In other words, if you're going to kill the cops and then end up dying anyway because they come back and kill you, then it is really about a revenge.
Well, no, it's not. It's about trying to, even if you go out and proactively do it because you think that they will eventually come after you, that's not revenge. It's a defensive situation. It's a thing where they're going to come and hurt me, so I'm going to go out and hurt them first to prevent the harm from coming. And if it doesn't work out,
do you know of a situation in our society today where you can actually go and defend yourself against a cop and not be murdered for it?
Say that again?
Do you know of a situation in our society today, we live right now, where you're going to be able to go out and cops are going to come to try and take you away or lock you in a cage, and you go blam blam blam, I'm taking out cops, and they're not going to that somehow you're going to get away with that?
Well, it's the same argument as, well, should you pay taxes, right? I mean, if don't you love this world that we live in where you can pay taxes and have no consequences levied against you? No, it's a terrible situation. We're trying to change it. We're trying to change a narrative. We're propagandists.
But what I'm saying is you're not actually really defending yourself.
Well, I would like to see it get to a point where one could and actually, maybe have a community to go to and say, hey, hide me,
People love peace, and when you show them how peace is done, I think that grows the liberty movement. And it's not about revenge. It's about living well yourself, and that will spread to others.
Right. I think that's how it really needs to be measured. I don't think that if you're taking out cops and then getting killed yourself that you're going to be growing the liberty movement.
Well, you're also not going to grow
not.
the liberty movement if you ostracize people who believe in self-defense either, which is, what happened to me with the Free State Project, by the way, okay? There's a lot of people out there who feel very strongly about defending themselves, whether it's against agents of the state or not. I mean, if anybody's ever listened to conservative talk radio, which is a very successful business, there's a lot of vitriol involved, okay? And
I'd like to point out, Chris, that you ostracized me.
Okay, I unfriended you on Facebook.
You were unfriended from from Porkfest.
Okay, I'd like to. Since it came
I was kind
up,
of in the middle of a point, and he interrupted me, if you would. So there's a huge market for vitriol, right? And there's a lot of people who have these ideas of, hey, it's wrong that the government's doing this to me, and I should be able to defend myself. So if it's a question of either or, that we're going to have a peaceful thing or we're going to have a violent thing, well, that's kind of silly. There's different markets that we can cater our rhetoric to, and Ian caters to one market, I cater to another market, and we certainly have overlap in our audiences. But I'm reaching people who he would not otherwise reach, and he's reaching people that I would not otherwise reach. So we are growing the movement, both of us. Okay, and I've only had a website for 2 months, and it's one of the top 100 libertarian websites on the planet Earth. Okay, so there seems to be a market for this rhetoric, if not the action.
Oh, there's definitely a market for it, and I think that. Well, anyway, all that aside, I want to just bring, since you brought it around to this ostracism thing, I feel like that's an important conversation to have here. As you may or may not know, the Free State Project board voted to remove Chris Cantwell, and this is a fairly rare thing. I think it's maybe happened once or twice before Chris. Voted to remove Chris because of some rhetoric of a violent nature that appeared on his blog, ChristopherCantwell.com. And I disagreed personally with the board's decision to do that, even though I was the one who put in the request to have them look at Larkin Rose as well. My purpose in doing that was to say, well, if you're going to kick out Chris Cantwell for his violent rhetoric, then you really should look at Larkin Rose as well. And I like both Chris and Larkin personally. So I think that what they should have done is maybe censured him at worst, said, hey, we don't appreciate this kind of rhetoric. This is not an appropriate thing to say, but not to remove him from the Free State Project. He's also been kicked out of the Keene Activist Center recently, which, I did not stand in the way of that because I didn't feel like it was my place. Why don't I ostracize Chris, though? I mean, I'm a real big peace activist, and I've actually been ostracized because I invited Chris to participate at this event. There are people who are not in this room today who presumably otherwise would have been here had I not invited Chris to the event. And I feel like that's the wrong way to handle this situation. As somebody who believes in peace and love, that's what I want to show to the world. I want to show that to Chris. I want to, have Chris or the police or whoever it is out there that I might disagree with see what peace is all about, and I can do my best to express that and show compassion and understanding towards the individuals, because I know I used to be a lot like Chris. I used to feel the same things that Chris feels, and I don't feel those things anymore. And I think it's because I've been in New Hampshire long enough to have that melt away and to be around peaceful people like Derrick J and Russell Canning and other wonderful folks. So I think that the people who are choosing to ostracize Chris, I understand why they do that. That's their belief system. To me, it feels totally wrong to do that. I just want to be friends with Chris so we can communicate and we can come to a better mutual understanding. And I want the same thing for the police. I want to be friendly with them. There's a police chief in town who won't talk to me, but most of them will talk to me and we'll have conversations. Does that mean they're going to change their mind tomorrow and stop doing their jobs? Not necessarily. But it might mean, as you'll see later on this afternoon with Brian Tan, our closing speaker, that eventually they'll turn to us for support. And I've had that happen. It wasn't just Brian. I had another police officer contact me via email within the last few months asking, hey, he basically said he believes in freedom, but he's working in this job, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I think showing love towards the aggressors is the most important thing that we can do. I'm not saying Chris is an aggressor, but showing love towards the people that we disagree with is very important. And so it's too bad that people ostracize this event because of Chris Cantwell, because they missed a really killer event. Thank you to everybody who's come here today and been a part of this. And thank you, guys. Any final comments? Feel free.
I just say, I like my discussions with Ian on this topic, and I think it makes for interesting content, if nothing else. And if people disagree with me, I'm really interested in hearing their response, which is sort of why I respect Ian's position. If you think that somebody's wrong, then have a conversation with them, and preferably let other people listen to it, because it's interesting and it makes people think. And ultimately, that's what my goal is. And look, a few years ago, I was a flag-waving patriot. I was running for Congress. Now I'm a flag-burning anarchist. I mean, I could be wrong, So that's why I want to have these discussions. And it's like, when people say, well, you shouldn't say that, well, what they're actually saying is, shut up, and that doesn't further anything. And if I'm completely out of my mind here, then the only way I'm going to figure that out is by having intellectual discussions with smart people like Ian and Derrick. And I would encourage everybody to have those conversations. If you have ideas like mine or you have ideas like theirs, I mean, just talk about them with your peers. And I think that we'll all be better off for doing so.
Anything else?
I wrote a quote from Nelson Mandela
Please.
earlier that I want to share with you guys just to close out for my thoughts. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. Just some thoughts.
Thank you, guys. This thing could wind up going all the way until the Rich Paul sine wave and then restarting and totally causing everybody to skip the Bitcoin meetup at 5:30 and Social Sunday at 6 o'clock.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeene.com. Freekeene.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeene.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeene.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.